On this Wednesday night, a renewed promise to help look for lost children. The federal funds to help find unmarked graves of Indigenous children who died in residential schools.
When children are treated this way, it's deeply, deeply disturbing and heartbreaking.
While pressure mounts on the Catholic Church to apologize. A reminder racism still exists.
She would have had a better chance of getting the care that she needed if she had been in the street.
The inquest into the death of Joyce Echaquan in a Quebec hospital comes to a close. What will it lead to? The man who led Israel for 12 years is out of power tonight, the unlikely coalition that unseated Benjamin Netanyahu. Plus, an international cyber attack cuts into operations at a Canadian meatpacking plant. And wildlife, tracking escaped elephants on an epic trek.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Decades of political promises have been made to Indigenous people in this country, most of them broken. Now, news about children buried in unmarked graves at a former residential school in Kamloops is triggering new promises. The federal government says $27 million is available to help search for other lost children buried at former residential schools across the country. It's not news that thousands died in the schools. Indigenous leaders and elders have known for decades. And 6 years ago, there was a detailed report about missing children and unmarked burials. What's been found in Kamloops has renewed calls to act. Today, the federal government said it will assist, but Indigenous people must lead the process.
They have been very clear. They want the work to be Indigenous-led, community-based, survivor-centric, and culturally sensitive. They wanted support for the research, access to archaeological expertise, and commemoration.
It will take time. The work is as basic as finding the graves, identifying the bodies, and bringing the children home from school, if that's what communities decide to do. David Akin has our top story tonight.
Alice, Victor, Fort Resolution, Baby Redbreast, Mona. These are but 4 of the 4,118 names listed in the National Student Memorial Register, the online registry of all those Indigenous children known to have died at a residential school. There are dozens of children on that list that were not known by their full name when they died.
When children are treated this way, it's deeply, deeply disturbing and heartbreaking.
This registry is the creation of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation at the University of Manitoba, and the registry was created with a one-time grant of $2.6 million, money that came from a $34 million set-aside by the Trudeau government in the 2019 budget to implement recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission having to do with burial information and missing children. Now, the federal government is ready to dispense the rest of those funds to Indigenous communities, more than $27 million, to find unidentified burial sites, document missing children, and honor and commemorate those children.
Let us people, the Indigenous people, take the lead in healing our own people. Kuda, enough is enough.
It has taken more than 2 years to be able to hand out the money because of consultations and government red tape. The federal cabinet finally signed off this week on the plan to give the money to Indigenous communities and survivor groups.
150 years ago, we were meant to be extinct as Indigenous people. 150 years later, we're still here, and we're in every facet of society in some way. Not as much as we want to be, but we're here. And that's to the credit of the strength and the resilience of our people.
As for the speed at which the federal funds will begin to show results,
we are walking at the pace of communities. I know people are eager to get answers as to what we will do nationally and what will the feds do. The reality is this is something that will be dictated to us by the communities that are affected.
Now, there did seem to be an acknowledgement today that if $27 million is not enough, Ottawa will step up with more cash. And in fact, it may not be enough. I spoke to an Indigenous leader today who told me that the cost of searching for missing burial sites can be as high as $50,000 per 2 square foot plot. Donna?
David, the Catholic Church ran many, though not all, of the residential schools. Other faith leaders have apologized. And back in 2017, on a trip to the Vatican, Prime Minister Trudeau asked Pope Francis to apologize. It's one of the calls to action as well in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. 6 years later, still no apology. How much is the pressure mounting?
It is mounting, and it's been there ever since 2015, since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but the church has been resistant to apologize. But now, you're right, the pressure has renewed in the last week, and now we have two of Trudeau's cabinet ministers asking the church to reconsider.
It's up to Catholics across this country to ask their church to do better.
I think it is shameful that they haven't done it, that it hasn't been done.
Now, ultimately, it's going to be up to the Canadian Council of Bishops to think about making some kind of recommendation to the Vatican. Donna?
All right, David Akin in Ottawa, thank you. Money and gestures will mean little if nothing is accomplished. For Indigenous communities across Canada and for the Tk'emlúps to Secwepemc people, the discovery of what are believed to be unmarked graves isn't only a reminder of the past, it's a reminder Indigenous children alive today still face so many disadvantages. Neethu Garcha reports from Kamloops.
In downtown Kamloops, it's sadly not hard to find someone who attended the nearby residential school. Below these symbols of support, one former student sitting on the street and too triggered to speak on camera told Global News reliving the beatings at the hands of school administrators has been nearly impossible to cope with. But he's encouraging fellow survivors to seek counseling support in hopes of true healing for future generations. It's a cause Secwepemc Tribal Chief Wayne Christian has dedicated himself to.
More children in care of the state now than there ever was when the Indian residential school system operated. Yes, it's a continuation. People don't see it, they don't see that connection. It's a multi-generational legislative process. And who pays the price? It's the kids, the children. Our children pay the price.
He's calling for the abolishment of the Indian Act and systemic racism. City officials are responding by giving those grieving some space.
I think there's obviously a great deal of healing that has to happen within their own community, and I think we as outsiders need to be patient and let that happen.
As we wait for answers on next steps and details about the discovery, any further use of ground-penetrating radar, the most commonly used technique in unmarked grave surveys, may require national standards.
There's very clear protocols that need to be used. So I think a national strategy is really important here to ensure that everyone who's doing this type of work is following the same general procedures so that we can compare the results and ensure we're providing the best possible information to communities.
Communities still trying to come to grips with what's happened.
Think about that, a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old. Think about that. What they did to our people, our ancestors, our grandparents, and our parents.
Neethu Garcha, Global News, Kamloops, BC.
Hundreds of people marched through Trois-Rivières, Quebec today to honor Joyce Echaquan. She's the Atikamekw woman who died in hospital last September after live streaming video from her own phone of the nurses insulting her with racist taunts. Today, the inquest into her death wrapped up. As Mike Armstrong explains, the coroner is promising her death will not be in vain. And a warning, some of the video in his story is disturbing.
It was, for Joyce Echaquan's family, 4 weeks of pain. But they came to the inquiry every day, hearing from witness after witness describe the mother of 7's final hours, how she felt, how she was mistreated, and what went wrong. On the last day of the hearing, a message from the coroner to Echaquan's husband.
À vos enfants, Monsieur Dubé.
She told him to teach his children that a small revolution of reconciliation was started by their mother. For the first time outside the hearing room, Echaquan's husband did speak, thanking the hundreds who showed up in support. He says it's given him energy and strength after a difficult inquiry.
The family is very happy about that. They felt all the warmth that coming from everybody, but it was difficult.
One of the first things the inquiry did was watch the Facebook Live recording, a 7-minute video where Echaquan is insulted by staff and laughed at. She was told she was better off dead and only good for sex. Among the witnesses, a nurse from the Joliette Hospital in the video. She testified when she heard it, she couldn't believe it was her, called it cruel, and begged Echaquan's family for forgiveness. Now, Echaquan had gone to hospital with stomach pains. 2 days later, she would die of a buildup of fluid in her lungs. But according to an expert who testified, she didn't have to die. He said she would have lived if she'd been monitored more closely.
This is not just about firing one or two people that are...
The family's lawyer says a recognition of systemic racism is needed. The inquiry was told that staff at the hospital in 2018 was offered training on Atikamekw culture. Of 200 employees, only 5 signed up. After Echaquan's death and the outcry that came with it, the Regional Health Board made cultural sensitivity training mandatory. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
There is still so much learning to do about Indigenous people and the history of how they've been treated in this country. Education is key. 6 years ago, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission clearly laid out what has to change. It called for provinces and territories to make age-appropriate curriculum on residential schools, treaties, and Aboriginal peoples' historical and contemporary contributions to Canada a mandatory education requirement for kindergarten to grade 12 students. Some governments have made significant changes, but Alberta, Ontario, and New Brunswick lag behind. Heather Yourex-West explains.
On Monday, students at this school on the Kikino Métis settlement in northeast Alberta gathered together to mourn, paying tribute to 215 children buried near a Kamloops residential school.
We had a service. How we would traditionally do and set up a memorial service if one of our children died is what I did with my students.
All students here learn about residential schools in all grades, though that's not part of Alberta's current curriculum. Right now, Alberta students do not learn about residential schools until grade 10. And while a new curriculum is being developed, many Indigenous educators believe it too falls short.
The draft K-6 social studies curriculum introduces 10 separate references, including a proposed exercise for students to read aloud from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
But the proposed new curriculum would not begin teaching kids about residential schools until grade 5. In Ontario, lessons don't start until grade 4.
By the time kids are in grade 5, you know, they've already learned a history of Canada that is based in settler colonial views. So now to introduce the residential schools and say, okay, and here's another part of Canada that we didn't think was important enough to explore with you because we didn't think you're ready. I mean, what kind of messages is that sending for kids?
It's why a growing number of critics are calling for this to change. Some educators are refusing to teach it at all.
It's a problem for me because I'm bound by law to teach from this curriculum. But my moral law will force me to look and tweak and change and manipulate because I know it's wrong.
Alberta's Premier says the proposed curriculum is only draft and could still be changed. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
There is breaking news out of Israel tonight. Opposition parties have reached a coalition agreement that could oust Benjamin Netanyahu, the country's longest-serving prime minister. Moments before a midnight deadline, a coalition agreement was reached, averting for now a 5th consecutive election in just over 2 years. The coalition is an unlikely alliance between 8 political parties with ideologies that range from the left to the far right, and for the first time, a party of Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. If it passes a vote of confidence, likely next week, ultra-nationalist Naftali Bennett would be Israel's new prime minister until 2023, and centrist Yair Lapid would then take over, assuming the coalition holds. Not going back to class coming up, Ontario's decision on returning to school. The third wave of the pandemic is not easing up the pressure on Manitoba hospitals. Intensive care units are still struggling. Now another province is offering to help. The Alberta government says it will take up to 10 Manitobans who are critically ill with COVID-19. They'll either go to Edmonton or Calgary. 40 Manitobans are now being cared for out of the province. 2 are in Saskatchewan and the rest are in Ontario. And some sad news today out of Ontario. Officials say one person from Manitoba who was transferred there 2 weeks ago has died. He was a man in his 30s. The Ontario government is facing a backlash over a decision to keep schools closed to in-person learning until September. With case numbers dropping, public health experts had urged the province to prioritize getting kids back into the classroom for the last few weeks of this year. But Premier Doug Ford says the move is too risky and says keeping schools closed will help keep summer reopening plans on track.
I will not, and I repeat, I will not take unnecessary risks with our children right now. The fact is, we're fighting a third wave driven by variants. Until we get more students and teachers vaccinated, outdoor activities are safest right now.
In a statement today, the Children's Health Coalition, which includes Sick Kids Hospital, said it was deeply disappointed Ontario has not acted on the broad consensus for reopening schools and said children must be a priority in the pandemic recovery. There is a growing consensus the highly contagious Delta variant, the one first identified in India, is becoming a big problem for Ontario. It's still unclear how widely it's spreading. Whole genome sequencing is needed to identify the cases, so confirmation is slow. Though Peel Region's top doctor says he's seen early data and the trends are concerning.
Preliminary analysis from the science table suggests that in 1 month, the Delta variant will be the dominant strain in our region, with the rest of Ontario weeks behind.
Dr. Lawrence Lowe says discussions are underway about possibly accelerating the rollout of second doses in regions like Peel to get ahead of the virus. From gas to beef, still ahead how the latest cyber attack on a private company impacts Canada. There has been another crippling cyber attack on critical infrastructure in the U.S. The target this time was JBS, the world's largest meat producer. It has plants in Canada, the U.S., and Australia. As Jackson Prosco reports, it appears Russian criminals are the culprits.
More than a dozen meat processing plants in the U.S. and Canada are slowly coming back online, including this plant in Brooks, Alberta, that supplies 1/4 of Canada's beef. After a ransomware attack on JBS, the world's largest meat producer, brought production to a standstill.
This attack is a reminder about the importance to private sector entities of hardening their cybersecurity.
The attack is believed to have been launched by a group of Russian hackers, similar to the one that caused the shutdown of a major U.S. pipeline. In that case, Colonial Pipeline paid nearly $5 million in ransom, while Americans paid the price in major disruptions and gas shortages.
Russia has basically figured out how to commercialize cybercriminal activity.
The U.S. has faced the brunt of recent Russian cyber attacks. Experts say the government of Vladimir Putin is at the very least complicit.
Anything that happens on a given country's territory that country is allowing to continue, we should view as essentially state sanctioned.
In 2 weeks, U.S. President Joe Biden will meet face-to-face with Putin in Geneva, armed with a long list of what the U.S. considers malign activities.
It starts with the aggressions in eastern Ukraine and the ongoing simmering conflict in northern Georgia, and extends also to the cyber realm.
There's little sense Russia will relent. This week, the country's foreign minister seemed to stir the pot, suggesting the insurrectionists who stormed the U.S. Capitol building in the name of former President Donald Trump are being unfairly persecuted.
We're not taking any options off the table in terms of how we may respond.
The Biden administration won't say how it might address this latest hack or Russia's continued actions. But stiff sanctions remain in place, while the U.S. urges private companies to better prepare for future cyber breaches. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
The journey's the thing, not the destination. Next, the herd of elephants wandering through southwestern China. An environmental disaster is unfolding off the coast of Sri Lanka. A container ship carrying tons of chemicals has sunk after catching fire. It was carrying plastic pellets and hazardous chemicals, including nitric acid. The ship had been burning for nearly 2 weeks. The coast is already polluted, and there are now concerns oil leaks from the ship's fuel tanks could further damage the coast. Experts warn this could be Sri Lanka's worst environmental disaster. A herd of 15 wild elephants has traveled hundreds of kilometers through southwest China. They have been on the move for months now and have destroyed more than $1 million worth of crops along the way. Why they're walking is a bit of a mystery. As Mike Drolet explains, there's now an effort to try to alter their course.
It's hard enough for a herd of elephants to hide in the wild. In a city, 15 elephants tend to stand out. This particular herd is all the rage in China right now. They left the reserve in December and are now just outside the provincial capital of Kunming, 500 kilometers from their home. A journey that is now being documented and scrutinized on local news like a car chase. Everybody wants to know why they're moving north, says this man. One local theory is that the herd's leader is inexperienced and just got lost, which ecologists say is unlikely.
Migration is a pretty complicated phenomenon.
A more likely explanation is environment. Officials have said there isn't enough edible vegetation on the reserve, and elephants eat a lot. So far on their journey, they've consumed 56 hectares of crops.
It's easy to imagine that, deteriorating conditions at home in the reserve might have triggered this movement out to utilize areas that maybe a century ago would have been used by elephant herds, in the past.
It's an issue China will have to address, but right now they need to keep the herd away from the city of 7 million people. Sirens didn't scare them off, and when the police tried to block the road with trucks, the herd found another path. They're elephants. They go where they want. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And I feel like they should be able to. That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is a spirit tree in the Bois d'Esprit forest along the Seine River in Winnipeg. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.